Let's look live now at Parkchester Mosque in the Bronx. Today, a funeral will be held. So already they have been doing the viewing for 2 hours, and now we're about to move into the funeral for the fallen New York police officer, Didarul Islam. Islam was killed on Monday, working off-duty when the Park Avenue high-rise shooting took place. Mayor Eric Adams is expected to speak moments from now, along with Governor Kathy Hochul and mayoral hopeful Zohran Mamdani, all expected to be there, along with Andrew Cuomo. We learned that last hour. He hasn't really said much since what happened on Monday, so this will be interesting. Perhaps he'll say something. It comes as Mamdani is now changing his tune, claiming he actually doesn't want to defund the police. Now, mind you, he's been saying that he did for years, and he started like a couple days ago saying that he doesn't, but whatever. It's quite the contrary to the anti-police statements that he's made between 2020 and now. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Emily Campagno. Also joining us today, Carly Shimkus, Fox & Friends' first co-host. Marie Harf, Fox News contributor and former State Department spokesperson under President Obama. And Ari Fleischer, Fox News contributor and former White House press secretary. Great to have them both here. Look, it's almost impossible not to talk about where we are with law enforcement on a day like this, and a man who's getting, in some polling, 50% of support among Democrat voters in particular.
Yeah, before we talk about the politics of this, can I just stipulate, it always feels different when a police officer, fireman, a member of our military is killed in the line of duty. And I was trying to think about why, and I think the reason is because they stand guard for all of us. And without them, where would we be? How vulnerable would we be? But these are the people who rush in, choose this profession. And so it's so appropriate when you see the New York City police officers line up, heartfelt, hand over their heart in salute of one of their fellow fallen. And that's what today is about, and I think that's what I want to focus on, because there's a family, there's 2 children, a third on the way, who aren't going to get to know their dad.
Yeah, it's so true. Carly, I know you guys were up very early this morning, and people have been talking about what this day would mean for the city of New York. And he didn't just stand between a killer and all those he protected. He was the only one at that moment.
Yeah, and right now my heart is breaking for Officer Islam's wife, thinking about how she's going to have to give birth while in mourning and hold her baby for the first time, thinking if only he was there with me is just unimaginable. I mean, when it comes to Zohran Mamdani's press conference, which is, of course, getting a lot of attention, he is the embodiment of the defund the police movement. You can't just walk that back. That would be like Donald Trump walking back his desire to build the wall. I mean, these are ideas that are fundamental to who they are as politicians. And you could even tell yesterday it wasn't even a full walk back, because he was still talking about how he wants social workers to go on domestic violence calls instead of police officers, which is an awful idea. But in practice, what that would mean would be a cut to police funding. I don't think New York City wants a socialist as a mayor. I think that what's really happening here is the other 2 candidates who are also going to be at this funeral are flawed for a variety of different reasons. But the reason this is a national story is because the Democratic Party could be unintentionally walking into the rise of the socialist movement at a time when the country is in a more moderate position. And you could tell that given the results of the presidential election. So if Mamdani wins, that means that donors will pour money into other socialist candidates. So this could be coming to a city or town near you.
You know, Emily, as Carly was talking about where some of the funding would be shifted, because that's what Mamdani is saying now. He's saying he's going to redirect those funds. They would be redirected away from the very force that showed up at that building yesterday, the SRG, that strategic response group. And yes, that group had to respond to Columbia University when rioters were taking over a hall, and that got violent. But can you imagine if they had not been at that building? And I know you have talked about their quick response. I don't know where we'd be without them.
No, of course not. That's the whole point of this. It is unimaginable to think of a city like New York City or anywhere without police officers. And it is equally terrifying to think that someone who espouses that is so close to becoming mayor, when in this Gotham City over any other city, it is paramount that the relationship between the mayor and the police force is one of production and mutual respect. you are right, you cannot walk back his comments. He's either blatantly lying then or blatantly lying now. And I think he's blatantly lying now because he had armed guards at his lavish wedding. He lives in a $3 million condo that is guarded. So this is a person that enjoys the benefits of men who are brave, men and women who are brave and willing to put their lives on the line for him. He enjoys that. Today, we mourn this heroic officer that died as he served, which was in uniform and as a hero. And I think about the really increasing percentage of NYPD that is Bangladeshi now. Well over 15% of the traffic enforcement, thousands are Bangladeshi. This is a strong, vibrant community within NYPD that has their own group, like the Hispanic Society. And speaking of which, the NYPD Hispanic Society, in conjunction with the Detective Rafael Ramos Foundation and Blue Lives Matter, have been fundraising for the Islam family, who will now spend every day without their father and husband. And so today we mourn as a city, and I rue the day if that person becomes mayor, and I pray to God he does not.
You know, as we are watching this right now, we are moments away from what we understand will be a couple of speeches with the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, and the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul. And then at that point, we'll see the ceremony actually go forth. It is streaming live, so we will bring you what we can of that. But it has been more than 2 hours of tens of thousands of law enforcement members from all over this great nation showing up to join those in the streets who are showing up to support their brethren. I mean, it is, yes, one loss of an officer, one life taken, I should say correctly. But we've lost officers. Their lives have been taken. And the way that this is described, this is just part of an open wound, as the men and women in blue have been targeted over and over politically from one side of the aisle. And so I think we've got that. Can we see Mamdani from his news conference yesterday trying to walk back those comments about, well, defund, not to defund police? Let's watch.
I've been very clear about my view of public safety and the critical role that police have in creating that. The vision that we've put forward in this campaign, despite what others may say, is not to defund the police. It is, in fact, to allow those officers to respond to these serious crimes that many of them signed up to address.
So again, Marie, I mean, in order to do that, you have to have the group that responds to those kinds, like on Monday, those high-rise attacks. And he wants to cut the funding on that. What's your thought? I mean, do you think that his brand of politics comes at the wrong time, as Carly says, as the country is much more moderate, if not leaning farther to the right?
I think those are a little bit separate questions. First, I would say what works in New York politically doesn't work everywhere else. We have Democrats who are moderates running Michigan and Kentucky and states across the country. So New York has always been kind of its own thing. Democrats will run candidates that fit the districts in the states. I don't think this is something we are looking to transfer across the country. You can tell a lot by a leader by how they respond to tragedy. And he flew back, went straight from he was overseas visiting family, went straight to the home of Officer Islam, met with the family privately, had breakfast. He stood at that press conference, spoke after the head of the Bangladeshi Police Officers Association. I'm glad you brought that up, because I liked that he was reaching out to the community that this officer was a part of. And I think things people said in 2020, when we watched George Floyd be killed horrifically on that video, we have asked on this couch, I have asked my own party, I'll speak for myself, to look at our words and our beliefs about police and give people space to actually do better. So I believe him when he says, I am not running to defund the police. He said that in June. He tweeted that in June, or posted wherever he posted in June. I don't think he's doing that to get elected. By every poll, he is going to win. I think that if we give space for politicians to learn about the importance of the police, now there are reforms needed, certainly. I think you heard someone at that press conference say, I don't want to defund the police. We take him at his word. I take him at his word.
Ari, your last word.
Well, what about his word 1 year after the murder of George Floyd, when he said we need to defund the police? So which word do you take him at? The one that's convenient now, or the one that was heartfelt then? That's the problem with these people who say, I want to defund the police, until they run for office and they say, I want to fund the police. He's stuck. He said it. I think he's a defunder.
You know, I think about, too, this is what makes me so sick to my stomach about that individual, is when someone reported that they were seeing an NYPD officer crying in the car, and he responded publicly, nature is healing. And I think about how ambushes after COVID were up almost 400% of NYPD, including Detective Rafael Ramos and Lieutenant Lu Jin Win, who were ambushed while sitting in their car. And he calls that nature is healing? That is monstrous. He does not deserve to be mayor of this city. He does not deserve anything.
Why do you think so many New Yorkers support him then? Not just Democrats. Like, he is winning a lot of votes.
Because he's going to give them free stuff, he says.
But, like, it is a question,
He's promising
right?
free stuff. I'm answering your question. He's dangling these things out, which, by the way, as mayor, he only has influence over. He does not have power. Although with this far-left city council in New York City, they'll probably back those ideas, which are, they're going to bankrupt the city. They're going to make the place a whole lot less safe. And by the way, this is spreading. I'll give you another one. So not just right after George Floyd, but in the city of George Floyd, Jacob Frey. Your party is running someone far, far to the left of Jacob Frey. And he is being called right now the Midwest Mamdani. He wants some of the same things. He talks about defunding the police and free grocery stores and free transportation. And you think free is free. But if the crime rises, and it always does, this is what we see. No. We already know it does. When you defund police, we already know it does.
He says he doesn't want to defund the police. That's what he says.
I'm giving you an example of where it's spreading. I'm giving you an example. And since Mamdani likes to go back to the origin of his comments being in Minneapolis with the death of George Floyd, I'm saying, look at what's cropped up there. This is something that you guys will come to a reckoning to in your party. It is a divide in your party.
There are much higher rates of crime in red states than blue states, of murder, of gun deaths in red states governed by Republicans than in blue states.
That's a nuanced. That's a nuanced statistic. That's a nuanced statistic. We can get into it later. I know we have to move.
Sorry.
We do. It's always like this, though, right? It's a tough moment.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.